Good afternoon, and for our friends joining in from Europe, I would like to say good evening. My name is Knut Dethlefsen, and I thank you very much for tuning in to our discussion on Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris' domestic agenda. What they can do, what they will want to do, and what they have to do is what we want to discuss this afternoon with three exciting guests, which I will introduce to you in a moment. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. This event is organized by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. We are a European social democratic organization, and this is our second live stream event after this very historic election in the United States of America in the year 2020. And it is, of course, no secret that the outcome of the election was a cause for celebration, not only for us, but for social democrats and progressives around the globe. And with the new administration moving quickly to take over the government in January, we want to take a closer look at the agenda of the Biden-Harris administration and the policies that will shape this country for the years to come and will, of course, have influence also on politics around the world. Specifically, we would like to focus on domestic policy. We'll have a second event in a few days on the 9th of December. You would like to mark your calendars maybe, on foreign policy. So this event is specifically focused on what will happen in the United States and what will shape the United States. But first of all, let me warmly welcome our wonderful guests who are joining me remotely due to the ongoing pandemic and health concerns. First of all, Nikki Budzinski from Budzinski and Partners is joining us. Secondly, Bill Spriggs from the AFL-CIO and Liz Watson from the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. Thank you very much for joining us today and for taking time out of your busy schedules to explain to us like what will happen and to analyze for us what you think is going to happen after the 20th of January, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their team will take office. I will introduce each one of you a little bit more detail later, but before we start the discussion, I would like to say you can, for our listeners and viewers, you can participate, of course, if you use the chat feature in your streaming platform. You can ask questions and also comment during the event. If you have submitted a question before the event, I will try to ask it in the discussion period with our guests. And I would like to say just a few words about the topic so that you see like where we are coming from and to frame maybe also our discussion. In our view, the incoming Biden-Harris administration faces a multitude of urgent crises. You could identify 5. One is, of course, the health crisis, and caused by that, a deep recession, which devastating consequences, in particular for working people and the middle classes. But there is also an urgent demand for racial justice and the ongoing climate crisis. And now, maybe something that is very much on our mind right now is the crisis of the country's democratic institution and the democratic process itself. So the number of challenges might seem overwhelming, and it might require some kind of policy triage, which actually might have negative consequences. However, each crisis also represents an opportunity for reforms that have been long overdue, and that is why we want to take a look at some of the progressive policy initiatives that the new administration might want to take and that can be done and that can have an early impact. Now you might wonder, why does this all interest a European political foundation? Why our interest in domestic policy? To that I would like to say that many of the challenges the US and the American society faces today are of course also pressing concerns in one or the other way for Europe as well and for European populations. And first among these is of course dealing with the pandemic and the economic fallout. But secondly, and that's maybe the more important reason, international engagement and international cooperation require a strong foundation at home. And of course, there is a strong hope in Europe that there will be some kind of reset button to re-establish a new transatlantic relationship, maybe something like a New Deal that will also include progressive policies for the future. The president-elect Joe Biden has said last week that to him, economic security is national security. Now that's a big thing. And he envisions a foreign policy for the middle classes. So for us in Europe, that begs the question, what does that actually mean? And how does he intend to get there? But now, I have spoken enough, and I would like to ask the questions to our guests. And they are all very closely connected to different progressive networks, progressive policy networks in this country, and have a wealth of experience in their fields. And while today we discuss the agenda of the incoming administration, I would like to make clear that none of us speaks on behalf of the administration. We are just trying to understand what will happen, and we will speak about that as in an analytical way, and each one of us speaks in her or his own capacity, just to avoid any misunderstandings. So I would like to start with Liz Watson. Liz is the executive director of a very interesting and important organization, the Progressive Caucus Center, and has served, among other things, as the labor policy director and chief labor counsel on the House Education and Labor Committee. Liz, you're very well connected with the progressive Democrats in Congress. So I would like to ask, what are your organization's priorities during the next month? And where do you see the role of Congress in supporting or also impeding the incoming administration? Thanks for being with us, Liz.
Well, thank you, Knut, for having me, and thanks to FES for convening this important conversation. And, I think it's important to talk for a minute about the moment that we find ourselves in that, you certainly alluded to in your introduction. This is a moment in which I think people's confidence in government has been badly eroded. And when people need a competent government more than ever, we are, as you mentioned, facing a massive public health crisis that is only getting worse, economic desperation, and systemic racism and climate catastrophe. And many of the things I just mentioned are not new, but have been with us for a very, very long time unaddressed. And our social contract, I think at this point, has been stretched nearly to the breaking point. And we have the opportunity now to pull ourselves back from the brink. And it is just such a critical moment for our federal government to deliver. And that's, for a couple of reasons. One, because people are desperate. And with the deepening recession and the pandemic getting worse. And a second reason being because doing anything less risks the further erosion of our democracy, and we simply cannot afford that. So I think we have a pretty good idea of where we need to start. And I also think there's absolutely no time to lose. Some political commentator I recently read said we need to do as much good as we can as fast as we can. And I think that's absolutely right. We are facing prospects of a very bleak winter. I was just looking at some new research, or maybe it's a month old, saying nearly half of households say they have experienced serious financial pain as a result of the pandemic. We know that's so much more acute among Black and Latinx households. And among lower and middle income households. And really where we need to start, right, is providing immediate relief to families who are suffering across this country. The Democratic-controlled House passed the HEROES Act back in May to provide further relief, but the Senate has refused to act. And I think right now, when we say the next month, right, we need to talk about what actually needs to happen right now, even before Joe Biden takes office, and that's further financial relief. And really, the danger that we face is in doing too little. And I expect that my co-panelists today are going to talk about that. I've seen Bill Spriggs quoted at least twice today in the paper on the subject of the need for very serious investment in our economy in order to prevent a slow and weak recovery and to further financial suffering. So Knut, we're facing a whole bunch of cliffs that were about to fall off at the end of the year. 12 million, we had some financial relief that the House and the Senate came behind to pass and was signed into law. And now, and some very serious investments that were made to prevent further economic disaster. But now we see those things expiring. So 12 million workers who stand to lose expanded unemployment benefits, millions of student loan payments that have been suspended that will fall due at the end of the year. There was an order halting evictions until December 31st. And if that isn't extended, rent that will fall due. Paid family leave benefits, and that's so important. I'm the mom of 2 kids, and I run an organization, and I see how folks are juggling what it looks like to have schools that are closed, to be if you are lucky to be juggling work, and we see we see women being pushed out of the workforce. And actually a drop in women's labor force participation. And if we don't extend paid family leave, that drop is going to be even further. But those benefits are set to expire that were passed via coronavirus relief. So, we know essential workers, have been getting claps throughout this pandemic, but they're not getting paid. And I don't think you can feed your family in claps, right? That's something that we need to address. We need a safety and health standard for workers who are out there, doing the hard work in this pandemic, and yet we still don't have an OSHA standard for dealing with the coronavirus, and we have state and local governments facing shortfalls. So, I know today there's an active conversation, and there has been for a long time, about the serious financial investments that we need in order to have a real recovery. And so I think that's where we need to start this conversation, is talking about the economic policies we need, and how we need to make sure that we are centering Black and Brown communities in the relief that's provided, so that we are addressing the very disparate impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on Black and Brown communities. And I know there's a huge pushback, from some folks who are saying, we've already spent a lot of money, and don't we need to start talking about austerity and deficits? And absolutely not. What we need to talk about is the real dangers in doing too little. And so I think that's what you can expect progressives to push for, around extending the unemployment insurance, the paid family leave, domestic manufacturing of the personal protective equipment, state and local government aid, shoring up our childcare workforce, which has been decimated in this pandemic, ensuring healthcare coverage, right? The safety and health standard, and guaranteeing people's paychecks when their employers need to temporarily shut down. That's something that, most industrialized countries did, and we didn't, and we certainly paid the price for it. And the student debt relief, that folks badly need. So those are some things. I'm not going to continue talking at you. I know we'll get into the broader agenda around the democracy reforms, the labor law reforms, the other things we want to see. But I thought I would start there with some of the immediate needs, because folks are really desperate, and it's time for the Congress and administration to deliver.
Thank you very much, Liz, for starting us off here. Let me turn to Bill Spriggs. Bill is the chief economist of the AFL-CIO and a professor at Howard University. And he also chairs the Economic Policy Working Group for the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD, and he serves on the board of the National Bureau of Economic Research. And I have to say, Bill, your resume is much longer, but this is what I would like to mention here now. But let us talk about today's topic. From your perspective, Liz has already talked about the need for economic policy, but in your view, what are the biggest economic and social challenges the Biden-Harris administration will face, and how will and can they address them?
So thank you for having me. I appreciate you putting this forum on. And just for your audience that may not be totally familiar with my university, just to be clear to you, the incoming Vice President Kamala Harris is a graduate of my department at Howard University. So you have some context for what Howard University is. The challenge is really complicated by the Republican Party now being the party of Donald Trump. And that means they aren't effective partners, or have indicated they don't really fully want to be effective partners in the healing process that the nation has to go through. And that's the biggest challenge that we face right now. If on January 4th, when we finish filling out our US Senate seats, the Democrats fail to win those 2 seats, that means that Mitch McConnell will be the head of the Senate. And he has already indicated that he sees little reason to deliver the relief that the nation needs. Now, to be fair, he failed to do that even for Donald Trump. So this is a deeper problem that we face. There's going to be his high level of partisanship, which is going to get in the way of doing something productive. But more disturbing is, I believe, his interpretation that because a disproportionate share of the damage has been done to Black and brown communities, that he doesn't want relief. And this is tragic. It is hard to explain to anyone the deep-seated nature of race and how it affects public policy here. You have to remember that Mitch McConnell is the senator from the state of Kentucky. The eastern part of Kentucky is in the region of the United States called Appalachia, because the Appalachian Mountains run through it. Many of you may think of it as just our coal country, because that's where we mine our coal, or we used to mine most of our coal. Those regions are among the poorest in the United States, but they are predominantly white, overwhelmingly white. And the same pain that we're describing going on in Black and brown communities is so common in those counties. And it's for the same reasons, and it's for the same sort of philosophy that Mitch McConnell espouses. And that is, we have embedded in our laws exclusions from the American safety net. And those exclusions were originally based on making sure to exclude the majority of the Black working class. Now, unfortunately, those same exclusions, because they weren't written as race specific, but they were written to exclude classes of workers, happen to be the same type of workers that are in Appalachia. And so the consequence, if you want to understand why does America continue to have these huge racial disparities, it's because of these exclusions, and those exclusions end up with cannon fodder among those white workers who resemble the Black workers that were being excluded. And so it's so ironic that Mitch McConnell continues to play the race card, even though it means the eastern part of his state lives in the same dire situations as African Americans spread across the country. Lack of access to healthcare, inadequate hospitals, poor schooling, all of these things are endemic to his region. The race card he plays is to play the same white supremacist card that Donald Trump played over acting in the interest of a whole class of workers. That's the biggest impediment that we face right now, and the reconciliation that we need, because the lack of a safety net in this environment has been blown wide open for everyone to see. And for people in Europe who think the United States is very advanced and would have some sort of safety nets, is now understanding we don't. And if you watched your TV and seen lines of Americans miles long getting food from food banks, I'm sure you've been astounded. How could that be in the United States, that there are literally miles of cars lined up to try and get food? And this is our lack of a safety net. Congress acted to expand our unemployment insurance system, which rarely covers American workers. In a normal recession, fewer than 20% of Americans get unemployment insurance. And the workers who are most affected by this downturn are service sector workers. Fewer than 8% qualify for unemployment insurance. So if we didn't expand our unemployment insurance system, we would have left millions of people with no access to income, Fortunately, we have a food assistance program, which we learned could be made very effective in the last recession. And so people did have access to food assistance, but this amounts to less than $2 a day in food, which in the United States doesn't get you very far if you only have $2 to spend on food. So these things have been made obvious. Our disproportionate death from COVID in our rural counties, particularly in our South, has made clear that our failure to expand access to health care is disproportionately affecting those people who live in those states, like Mitch McConnell's Kentucky, though fortunately, the people of Kentucky got to vote and force an extension of health care. But this is not true in many of our other states, where meatpacking is a major industry, and it is in the rural areas where we have few hospitals, and they are poorly supported by our Medicaid system, which is partly supported by our states. Our state and local governments are going through extreme financial difficulties because they are responsible for Medicaid, which is our health insurance coverage for low-income families, mostly families with children. And the result is that their burden has exploded in the face of this downturn, because so many workers have lost their private health insurance and have to rely on access to Medicaid. And then you have those states that refused the federal offer to expand the coverage so that more workers would have access to health insurance, and that's fallen through. And as Liz was talking about, our lack of a health standard for the protection of our frontline workers has meant those in meatpacking, those who work in nursing homes, those who work in our prisons, those who are bus drivers, our transportation workers, all of our frontline workers have faced disparate levels of catching COVID and hence dying from COVID. If you look among Black and brown workers, you see that the disease is decidedly a disease of working age people, whereas for our white population, the disease is far more common among people over the age of 65. So these disparities have been made clear, and that's the biggest challenge: healing the political divide, trying to cut through America's gaps, which are humongous, for coverage, and sustaining that, because as Liz said, that effort to close those coverage gaps for unemployment, for health insurance, all of those things expire at the end of this year in just a few weeks. Extending those would be expensive, but absolutely necessary, because we haven't finished healing from this disease. This is a unique challenge for the United States because it's really a war. It's a war against the virus, and the U.S. has never faced a war at home of this magnitude since our Civil War. So when, the fact that we've lost 265,000 people is not something the United States has experienced before.
So I would like to include also Nikki. Thank you, Bill, for outlining, the humongous challenges that are there. I would like to bring Nikki Budzinski into our conversation. Nikki is the founder of the strategic consulting firm Budzinski and Partners, and prior to that she served as a senior advisor in the administration of Governor Pritzker in Illinois, and where she led many significant initiatives, including the passage of a $15 statewide minimum wage. And Nikki has also worked in various levels in the labor movement at the national level and the state level, serving as the national political director to the United Food and Commercial Workers Union here in Washington, D.C. And Nikki, the Midwest region was, of course, crucial in delivering the White House to Joe Biden. One could say maybe he reconstructed the blue wall, or I would ask, did he reconstruct the blue wall? And what should the new administration now do to deliver also for the Midwest, especially when it comes to economic policies and to the creation of jobs? And what can the Biden-Harris administration do?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Knut, for this opportunity to join this forum. Really appreciate the opportunity. And it's really an honor to be on a panel discussion with Liz and also with Bill. Learned a lot from their comments as well. So I'm coming to you from Chicago, Illinois. Illinois is always been a part of the solidly blue wall of the Midwest. But as you noted, Knut, in 2016, that blue wall came down, and that's what in large part led directly to the election of President Trump. And we're really proud to see that, in Wisconsin and Michigan, in particular, these were states that were red or went to Trump in 2016, now flipped back to Biden. And I would truly give a shout out to the labor movement as a very critical part of what happened. The work of the AFL-CIO in those states, those state federations, those CLCs, those unions, local unions in Wisconsin and Michigan were certainly working their hearts out to build a better connection with working people and our candidate, who in 2020 was Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris. And so I think what you saw was a better performance as it related to working people connecting with the message of a Biden-Harris ticket, and they turned out, and that blue wall that came down in 2016 was rebuilt. But I would just say that I don't think that can be taken for granted. I think that the Democratic Party in particular needs to continue to work hard to continue to earn the trust of working people and put forward an agenda that puts economic policy, addressing income inequality and inequity in our society first and foremost a priority. And I think some of the things that you're seeing indications of from the incoming Biden-Harris administration are very encouraging in speaking to that. And I would just say in Illinois and throughout the Midwest, one of the issues that I've found myself working both in partnership with the labor movement on, but addressing one of the biggest crises that you noted, Knut, in the beginning of your comments, is addressing the climate crisis. And so I've been doing work in the Midwest since leaving the Pritzker administration to help build stronger bridges to working people and a pro-worker agenda addressing and head-on developing strategies that address the climate crisis. And in that work, we've put forward in Illinois a set of priorities that puts us on track with our governor's aspirational goal of getting to 100% clean energy by 2050. We put working people at the center of those recommendations. We put disadvantaged communities, Black and Brown communities that we know have been, as Bill has noted, most notably impacted by the COVID crisis, but also by the climate crisis. We need to put forward a strategy, and we feel like we have in Illinois, of how to bring in more equity, how to make sure these are good jobs that we're transitioning to in a clean energy economy while tackling the climate crisis. I would say for a Biden-Harris administration, it's very encouraging that they have made this climate crisis and the issue of addressing working people as a part of that climate crisis agenda and how to address that issue front and center. You saw that with Secretary Kerry just got named the climate czar, one of the first nominations or one of the first top senior level picks that the incoming administration publicly announced, and I think that was very intentional. It was the administration's, effort to really lead on this issue, coming right out of the gate and setting up top leadership to start to begin to address that. I think you're seeing a Biden-Harris administration very encouragingly trying to get things in place so that they can be ready with urgency on day one. And I think you heard that need very clearly in the remarks of what Liz and Bill have said. We need an administration that's going to immediately start to make improvements and address some of the most pressing challenges facing working people in this country that have been, quite frankly, neglected and eroded over these past 4 years of a Trump administration. There is just, quite frankly, too much work to do to not be ready on day one. And I think you're seeing a Biden-Harris administration indicate, especially I would say on issues around the economy, issues around climate, that they want to really start leading. And so I think all of that is incredibly important. I think, again, I would just kind of echo some of the things that Liz and Bill have said. I think this administration should be thinking big and creatively. It's very possible on January 7th, when the Georgia runoff elections happen, that we might not pick up those seats we need to pick up to win back the Senate majority. So we need an administration that has a plan for the wonderful case in which that maybe does happen and we take back the majority and can really start moving some things, or in the event that we can't and we still have Leader McConnell leading the Senate and, quite frankly, likely being an obstructionist to some of the more forward-thinking policies that a Biden-Harris administration might like to pursue. So what are different opportunities or creative ways for the administration to start thinking through how to be proactive? Is it through executive orders? I've been very encouraged in the work, again, that we've been doing in Illinois around a plan to invest in clean energy infrastructure, to create good paying jobs, address equity, and the need to create jobs in the Black and Brown communities throughout the state of Illinois. Taking some of these ideas that were incubated in the states and having an opportunity for them to be heard and actually realized at a federal level is very exciting. And I think you're hearing possible opportunities of that with the Biden-Harris administration very openly talking about the need for a large stimulus and infrastructure bill. Infrastructure can oftentimes be a bipartisan, a Republican and Democratic issue that people can come together around. And I think the country needs things like that right now. Obviously, we need COVID relief. That comes first and foremost. But an infrastructure bill, this is the time to be investing, creating good paying jobs, and looking to the future and going big. And I really think that this country getting back on track with a plan to build a strategy toward a clean energy economy is critically important. And I think you're hearing that from a Biden-Harris administration. So we in the states are really looking forward to lifting up some of our ideas to a federal level, and are really optimistic that the opportunities for working people can be fully realized in a transition to a clean energy economy. And a lot of that is obviously through a pathway to unionization and good labor standards in that new economy. But we look forward to being a place of good ideas to send up to the Harris-Biden or Biden-Harris administration to really move on. So looking forward to them taking office.
All right, thank you very much for this optimistic outlook. Can I just ask like one quick follow-up question? Because of course the different regions of the US are of high interest, and from a German perspective, probably also more general from a European perspective, the regions of transformation are of particularly interest. So Joe Biden's designated National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that the administration needs to tackle the geography of opportunity so that all regions experience a middle-class revival. Now, looking at the United States, that seems like a very bold goal. Like, can you translate that for us, what he might mean with that? And how would you translate something like that into policy?
Mm-hmm. Well, how I would respond, I think what he is speaking to is very oftentimes there are states like New York, states like California, coastal states that are really leading on some of our more progressive policy ideas. They then kind of very slowly kind of creep inwards into the middle of the country. I would say Illinois is probably, again, like a little bit of a progressive blue island in the middle of the Midwest. We have super majorities in our Democratic legislative controlled in the House and the Senate, so in a Democratic governor. So we're able to actually move real progressive policy. But I think what Jake is really referring to is, you know, we need to take into account that each of our regions within our own country are very unique. For example, in the state of Illinois, we still burn a lot of coal. We still rely very heavily on our nuclear fleet to make sure that we have the amount of baseload power we need to keep our homes warm in the winter. In New York, they have a very different energy portfolio. They do not have any nuclear plants or burn any coal in New York. So to compare our transition just from a climate perspective, it's very different. Our transition is going to look different than New York. But I think what Jake is trying to say is that we need to take that uniqueness of the regions of the country into account, but try to help everybody reach some common metrics around, you know, what I would hope he is saying about around income inequality, around addressing job creation. These are things that are universal, but tackling them are probably unique in Illinois versus Florida versus Washington State. And so we need to be able to think strategically like that.
Thank you. Can I ask Liz and Bill just to answer one question real quickly, like take a sharp, like what are in the first 100 days, like the 2 things or 3 things the Biden-Harris administration needs to accomplish? Liz, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, coronavirus relief, I'm just going to call that one of the things. Okay. And so that's everything that I said in my first answer. So there you go on that. And then I want to talk about some of the things that can happen, as my fellow panelists just did, you know, via executive action. I think, you know, one of the things we've seen as attacks on our labor unions have been enabled by state legislatures and too often by Republicans in Congress, as we've seen the erosion of labor union density, you know, over the past 40 years, we've seen the erosion of wages. And so what can we do to strengthen our labor unions and raise wages? And I think at the executive level, there's a lot that can happen. So, you know, you heard Bill talk about the importance of raising the minimum wage. Let's get that through Congress, and let's get it for federal contractors, which can be done with the stroke of a pen, to $15 an hour. We can have a rulemaking to reset that overtime threshold so that, you know, workers get appropriately paid for overtime hours. When they work long hours, we can use the rulemaking process also to strengthen the funding for the care economy, for elder care workers and for public sector elder care workers and the child care workforce. And we also should really think about how we use the power of the purse around federal procurement reform. How do we encourage the dollars that go into companies for federal contracts to be dollars that go to high road companies that pay good wages and support unionization? And so federal procurement reform, things like, first off, reinstating the Fair Pay Safe Workplaces executive order that Trump stripped, which would stop labor law violators from getting federal contracts. Those are all good places to start.
Bill, what would your take be?
So I would say all of the above, so I don't have to repeat them.
No.
The president promised the labor movement that he would support rewriting of our labor laws that already passed in our House of Representatives this year, called the PRO Act. For those outside the U.S. who wonder why don't we ever do general strikes, it's because it's illegal in the United States. And what happened in the 1940s was our labor laws were reformed to deny the labor movement the ability to act as a movement. And that's one of the most important things that the PRO Act does, is lift those restrictions so we can act as a labor movement. That will do a lot to revitalize democracy and the small d democracy in the United States, to have a viable working class movement. We have no cross-racial organizations as large as our labor movement. And it's very important in this environment for racial healing that we have a very strong organization and an organizing effort that goes across race. And there are important things that can take place in re-engaging the world by having John Kerry re-engage us on the environment. It's clear that we're going to have to rewrite a lot of international rules. You cannot reach the Paris Accord goals if trade laws do not explicitly speak to the environment, and they need to speak to labor and labor standards as well. So I think re-engagement with the rest of the world is something that doesn't take the Congress or Mitch McConnell, that the president can do to be a positive force going forward for everyone.
Can I just ask like one follow-up question to that? Do you think you're going to have a stronger labor movement after 4 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris leading the administration?
It will help, and it will help if we have a strong economy. We have been making rebounds because the economy was stronger and workers felt empowered, and they saw the labor movement as a way to empower them. But it will be a different world if we get the PRO Act passed and we actually go back to being a labor movement. It will be such a different world. I think you have to look back at the 20s and 30s when we actually had a labor movement. People have forgotten it, of course, because most of those people are dead who understood what it looked like. And so many people forget what our labor movement used to look like. But it will be a different world.
And do you see a full recovery that will take like a decade again, like after the last financial crisis, or can this recovery be faster?
If Democrats control the Senate, then this will be a much faster recovery, because it really isn't a financial crisis. It's a crisis of moral fiber on the part of our government and mismanagement of a situation. So as soon as we get the virus under control, we should be in a position to have a very vibrant recovery, as long as, you know, what Liz mentioned before, we don't go to austerity too soon. So both fully engaging on solving this virus and not pulling back from full recovery from the virus, we are well positioned to have a very strong and robust recovery.
I would like to ask like one question to Liz. That's also, I'm being asked this question very often, but I'm actually not qualified to answer it. And that is, do you think that the incoming Biden administration has adequately acknowledged the progressive wing's support in the election? And are you happy with the cabinet picks and what has been announced, or do you miss more progressive voices in what is forming now as a team for around Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
I think the Biden administration has made a hallmark of the way that they operate, hearing from a lot of different folks about their views. And I think, when you look at the Biden-Sanders task forces that formed, and those were really meaningful opportunities for engagement. We have seen that there's a lot of interest in hearing from folks across the political spectrum, and I think that's good and important, and that's what makes for a vibrant democracy. And a lot of the things that we've seen commitments to, both on the campaign trail and now, are commitments that I think do center the importance of our democratic institutions like our labor unions and our politics, and that really, that there is a real understanding of the level of investment that we need. There's something that Bill said earlier that I thought was really provocative and important, and I wonder if we can dig in. I want to suggest that you made, Bill, about racial division and white supremacy, really affecting the way that people vote, and our ability to get policies passed that lift up Black and brown communities, white people in Appalachia, right? That lift up a broad swath of the electorate, and you talked about the importance of labor unions just now to really creating the space for people to come together, and for multiracial coalitions. Multiracial coalitions to actually advance the interest of working people. And so I think that's a really important point to kind of pause on. And I don't know if we can to say more about that, because I do think that, white supremacy is a thread that ran through this election, and it's a thread that is going to keep hammering us. And unless we actually really think seriously about what are the democratic institutions, labor unions, community-based organizations, what are the policy reforms, democracy reforms, including labor law reform, including ending voter suppression, that we need to build more durable power for working people. Because I think, when we think it's well and good to talk about policy, we know these policies pull through the roof. Florida passed a $15 minimum wage on the ballot, right? We know that, right? But then at the end of the day, why is it that policies that are wildly popular with voters, are very hard to enact? And I think it is because we have allowed, for legislators to beat up on our democratic institutions, and we can't allow it anymore if we're going to have multiracial solidarity behind addressing issues that working people really need. So I think that's kind of a bigger picture point, but one that Bill made that I just sort of wanted to, I guess, what do they say these days? There's a plus on Zoom that you put in the chat, plus to that. And I don't know if there's any smarter, maybe Nikki or Bill, if you have other ideas about how to actually make that happen.
Yeah, maybe I can ask then the question to Bill. I mean, what would you say? How do you push back white supremacy as a political force? But that also begs the question. I mean, that's basically a question we asked loudly or silently. I mean, why do so many blue-collar workers support Donald Trump or have supported him? And he raised his voter share, and and then how do you push back against that? And is it possible to win those workers back?
Some of them I don't know if we can win them back, but um, my take on it is this: uh, the original sin in the United States, of course, was slavery and the white supremacist ideology that justified it. And then, of course, we had a massive war, the worst war the United States has ever faced, ever, over that issue and that ideology. And so it's real, it's powerful. This is why we still argue about the statues to the generals and the leadership of that effort. So it is a real ideology, and people see it as a viable way of operating, which is why Mississippi and South Carolina and Arkansas still look like Mississippi, South Carolina, and Arkansas, and not like the rest of the states. The states that we were calling red states are actually states with very low union density. So there's a reality that I could call them red states, or I could also call them unorganized states. The only states that went blue that weren't in that group were Virginia and Georgia. So I think you have to remove the cynicism of those white working class people who understand that they have been excluded because they are too much in the grouping of the class of workers that are Black workers. And I think the resentment is they know that they've been excluded because of that. They understand that they were cannon fodder, that when we said sharecroppers won't get Social Security, those were their parents, those were their grandparents. They know that when we said the minimum wage laws don't apply to the work they do, that was the work they did. And so the reason why they have no wealth is the same reason why Black people today don't have wealth. And I think they have this resentment that they have been punished because of that. And therefore they resent the people who were the source of that punishment, in their view, not the white politicians who excluded them, but the Black people who are being excluded because they knew that that was the game. And therefore they feel a need to pledge allegiance to those politicians who want to say, but I'll do something for you because you're white. I'll make up for it in some way because you're white. And that's what they want to put their coattails to. And so that's why you really need an organization that can cut across and actually organize these sets of workers under their common economic agenda. And we can't do that under our current laws. You know, when people look at us and say, why can't low-wage workers at Walmart organize? This is the largest corporation in the United States when it comes to employment. Why can't you organize them? And that's because we can't do it as a movement. Those workers by themselves, store by store, have to do it. In the 1920s, if Walmart had said, we're firing these workers at this store for organizing, our plumbers union would have said, oh, you think someone's going to fix the plumbing in your building? When the lights go out, you think an electrician is going to show up? You think you're going to get deliveries? You think a Teamster is going to deliver to your store? Not going to happen. And it was that ability to respond as a movement and say, you won't treat other workers that way because the rest of us won't let you. Currently, it's turned us into sort of, a cottage thing of, I have a union card and I have union privileges. I can't help you out. And so I'm really interested only in helping myself. And you get some union members who kind of voice it from that perspective of, why are you helping out minimum wage workers? They aren't members of our union. It hurts the movement. It hurts solidarity. We are not allowed to act with solidarity. And once armed with the ability to act with solidarity, I think it will just be such a different movement, because then when the labor movement speaks, it will speak on behalf of all working people, because it will have the ability to do something for all working people.
Liz, is progressive populism the answer, the alternative to Trump's nationalist or faux populism?
I think progressive populist ideas. I mean, I think one thing that we did see is, a lot of these ideas really winning at the ballot box. I mean, Fox News, the night of the election, ran a poll. I can't remember if it was 72% of voters supporting Medicare for all. I think there's, generally a huge amount of support for a $15 minimum wage. Is a huge amount of support for forming unions. The vast majority of workers would say, do say, I want to join a union if I could. If I, wasn't dealing with union busting and the barriers that get put up in organizing drives. So, I think there's a conversation right now happening about do we diminish the scope and scale of our ideas, or do we actually put the scale and size of ideas on the table that are big enough to address the crises we face? And I come down squarely on the notion that, we have to go big, or we are just going to be, nibbling around the edges of actually addressing the problem. We are in a very tough place that was a long time in the making. The systemic racism is, since the founding of our nation, and economic inequality, as Bill just described, we have been dealing with for decades and decades. And so we have a ton of work to do, and we need to make some of the really fundamental reforms that will allow us to actually have a democracy where, real people have a voice in Washington. I mean, I think what's fascinating to me is how we have all of these policies that have all this support, majority popular support, that are very difficult to get through and signed into law. And a lot of that, it reflects white supremacy. It reflects things like the filibuster, which have origins in white supremacy. It reflects the fact that, states that are very sparsely populated, like Montana, have the same number of senators as states that are very densely populated. And that, disadvantages disproportionately Black and Brown voters. And so, there are these fundamental reforms that we really need to actually set in our sights, and a lot of them have to do with unrigging the rules, not just of our economy, but actually of our democracy. And so that's some work that we have set out for ourselves, and work that we are really excited about at the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center.
Nikki, can I ask? Thank you very much, Liz, for that. Nikki, can I ask you one question that's going to be the last question, because we are coming towards the end, so I asked for very quick answers now. Given you talked about the need for the Biden administration also to engage in climate, but given the multiple challenges at home, will the Biden administration have any resources left to really dedicate for international cooperation in global challenges?
On climate, you mean, Knut?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that, naming again Secretary Kerry to be the climate czar, I think in that role, I think it is intended that he will do a lot of international diplomacy kind of in order to rebuild the bridges that have probably been in a lot of ways burned over this last 4 years internationally as it relates to climate, and rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, putting the country back on track to meeting some real metrics of transition to a clean energy economy. Again, I do really think that it's encouraging. We need investment. Infrastructure is really what we desperately need in order to make the transition to address the climate crisis, but also to create some great, good union jobs in this country. I think people want to be put back to work. We need a jobs plan right now amid the pandemic that we're dealing with. Obviously, again, I agree with what Liz and Bill have said. First and foremost, COVID relief. I think, though, a part of COVID relief, it is an economic crisis. And to deal with an economic crisis, you need a jobs plan. And an infrastructure bill is just that. I think it would accomplish two things. It would, help us transition and address our goals toward Paris, the Paris Climate Accord, but also I think it would put a lot of good people to work. And so resources are never unlimited, but I do think that the indication of having John Kerry out there as a first appointment, a commitment, it's already been made clear to rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, and then talk of investment here, I think is hopefully going to get us there.
Great, thank you. Bill, I would like to ask also one last question to you. I mean, there's going to be a lot of need for spending in the upcoming months when you look at the deepening economic and public health crisis. But at the same time, if the Republicans retain the majority in the Senate, they're probably going to push for austerity measures. So how is that going to play out, and how can the administration then work big if that is happening?
Well, unfortunately, it won't be able to work big if McConnell is in charge of the Senate. Despite our hopes that we could reach common grounds with them on infrastructure, I fear it would be way too limited, and it wouldn't include the infrastructure we actually need to be rebuilding, which is we have to rebuild the infrastructure of our care economy. We can't get women's labor force participation back up until we heal the care economy. And we have to remember, infrastructure is really supposed to be, what are the conduits that the government provides so that people can get to work? That can be a bus or a metro or a highway, but it's also daycare so that women can go to work. So that's what I fear, is we would get something way too limited, not nearly as broad as it needs to be, and not addressing the real gap we have at the moment, which is getting women's labor force participation back up.
All right. Liz, what do you think? Can the Democrats win the 2 Senate seats in Georgia?
Well, I'm here in my nonpartisan capacity, so I'm not going to take that bait. But I think no matter what happens in the Georgia elections, and I will just say it was really astonishing to watch the level of organizing by Black women in Georgia this election cycle, and yet I think another testament to the power of organizing. No matter what happens, it is critically important that across the country we continue to push for the relief folks need. We continue to push both, the House, which has shown, the Democratic-controlled House has shown, the capacity to write very strong legislation to get us the relief we need, but that we push the Senate Republicans to do what they need to do to deliver for the country, and that no matter what, we also think creatively and about what the administration can do. And I think you heard some pretty creative thinking here. Women's labor force participation, it is also shocking to see, we have been set back decades as women have left the workforce because of the frayed social safety net that we have that Bill spoke of. So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of work ahead. And I think no matter what happens, as I said in the election, we need results, and we need them now.
Thank you, Liz. Now we need to finish this very interesting conversation. I hope we will have an opportunity to continue it once the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration is in place and governing, and maybe we can assess what we have discussed today, like after the administration has started its important job. And now, I would like to ask you one final question, really a quick take, that no longer than 3 sentences. Do you think that the administration, the incoming administration, has a chance to become transformational, which might be needed for the country and the world? Nikki, why don't you start?
I think that's their intent, but I think they're trying to put the infrastructure in place to be ready to start that work immediately, and I think that's very encouraging. And they've done that despite not a lot of cooperation from the outgoing administration.
Bill, why don't you continue?
Well, they've chosen people with the experience to get things done and to get some things done, even if they don't have control of Congress. But I fear that if the Republicans control the Senate, the setup will be in place that we'll be looking at Donald Trump in 2024.
Oh, well, Liz, the final word is yours.
Yes, I think there is the potential for transformation. I think the incoming administration has shown a very strong grasp on the power of executive action, whether it's rulemaking or executive orders. And I think no matter who it is who controls the Senate, that it's critical that that folks hold feet to the fire on what it is that people across the country really need.
So thank you very much for sharing your insight and your analysis with us this afternoon. This was a very fascinating conversation. I would like to thank all of our viewers for being part of this conversation. You watched a conversation organized by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation's North America program, about what we can expect from the incoming administration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, which will take office on January 20th in 2021. And we will stay tuned. We will watch that very much. We will follow it with analysis. So I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please tune in again on December 9th, where we will have a similar debate focusing on the foreign policy agenda of the incoming administration. I thank you very much, and I wish everybody a good afternoon and a good evening. Thank you from Washington, D.C. My name is Knut Dethlefsen. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.